So good morning everyone. So I'm Josh and right now I'm working at Deal Grocer. So at Deal Grocer I was able to help build Pay Central and UTML. So those are e-commerce sites. So I have been working for the past 5 years and I have been using Ruby to build Rails apps, Sinatra apps, Cuba apps. So when I first joined Deal Grocer, I was surprised that Deal Grocer was using Rails. Deal Grocer was using Cuba, which is somewhat like a micro framework. It's not really a micro framework. It's like Sinatra. It's much more than Sinatra. And what I learned there is that it's not really the framework, but rather how you use the framework. And then there are several types of frameworks. There's the fat framework and there's a small framework. So my topic is not about that, but how we use the technology and the tools and the processes to get the job done. So let's start with a couple of lessons which I learned, which I couldn't find in books. Because of course I'm a book reader. I like reading books. I like reading technical books. But I'm here to share my experiences as a Ruby developer. And over the past couple of years, as a Scrum Master, I was able to experiment with different types of setup with different members of the team. So I'll also be sharing the things I've learned while working with the other Ruby developers. So, for example, if you were asked how long does it take to build an e-commerce site, what would you answer? Well, to be honest, that's a really hard question to answer. And to help us answer this question, let's start with a little exercise. Suppose I were to ask you that in the next slide, you'll see a lot of apples there, and you have 30 seconds to count the number of apples. Would you be able to do it? So, okay, I'll repeat again. You'll be counting the number of apples in the next slide. So, are you ready? Alright. So, you have 30 seconds. So, right now, there are so many apples in this slide. That's really hard to count the number of apples. For one thing, this is one of the main issues when developing big projects. The project's so big that you start to be overwhelmed. You become overwhelmed at the size of the project. And not only that, the deadline is approaching and then this problem comes up and then you're unable to solve your problems. So what if we try to solve this problem by making the problem smaller, or at least cutting the problem into smaller parts? So let's say your boss tells you that in order to solve the problem or to save the company, you have to count the number of burgers in the next slide. So right now, I'll be giving you a much simpler problem. So I'll repeat, you'll be counting the number of burgers in the next slide. So you have 30 seconds, so the timer starts now. So if you think about it, you can even count the number of burgers in just 5 seconds or 10 seconds. So how many burgers are there? 5. So that's great, correct. So that's, to be honest, when you are solving a simpler problem, there's also that behavior to try to solve the other smaller problems. So that becomes a habit. One of the things I learned, well, I actually got to work with Rad at Deal Grocer for a short period of time. And the one thing he told me there is that when you're trying to estimate a big project, and there are so many parts, you try to cut the project into smaller parts and then divide it. After cutting those parts, after cutting the project into smaller parts, you estimate the small part and then add up the estimates. Isn't that simpler? But of course, that's not what the first lesson is all about. It's all about seeing what we don't see. And usually, when we're given business goals or technical goals by our bosses or clients, the boss only tells us how many burgers are there. But in reality, you also need to count the number of fries in the last picture. So who here is capable of counting the number of fries in the last slide? Well, right now, nobody is able to answer that. Even I wouldn't be able to answer that because I'm not prepared. because this talk is more on knowing what we don't know and knowing what we know, because that's true knowledge. Because no matter how much we try to know, and no matter how much we try to count and estimate the things we know, if we're not ready and we're not prepared for the things that the usual deployed apps are experiencing, we won't be able to estimate properly. And that's the lesson here in this exercise. So next lesson is that remember this meme. So it works in my local. And right now, to be honest, when building a Rails application, it's really important for us to know how many customers are we serving, how many administrators are going to use your site. We will be given specs on what to build, but the bigger question is that who's gonna use your app? Is your app gonna serve 1,000 customers? Is your app gonna have a sudden spike at 12 a.m. on Sunday? So those questions are usually not asked when you are being introduced to a new project. But unfortunately, the infrastructure side of the application is already a big topic by itself. For example, this is the perception of when to do the deployment. I'll be showing you another slide, which is reality. So, for example, in this slide, you can see that most developers are actually doing the deployment at the last part, after all the development work has been done. But unfortunately, here's what happens. So the harsh reality is that deployment is usually underestimated, and there are a lot of things that aren't being taken into account. Like, for example, scaling, security. Is your site always available? What if we have what if we need to upgrade? So how do we set up the maintenance page, and so on and so forth. And then the other things that you need to worry about is, of course, performance. What if 3 people cannot even use the same site all at the same time? And then, of course, analytics. So here's a funny story. One time, I estimated a certain set of features, and then I was actually able to complete the features on time. So okay, I told my boss, hey, here's your set of specs. What's the next step for me? What are the new features? Well, then my boss told me, hey Josh, we're gonna do some A/B testing. We're gonna do some multivariate tests. So how are we gonna track? So how do we know how many users use your new set of features? Then I told my boss, but I never estimated those things, and you never even told me in the first place that we're gonna do some A/B tests. So to be honest, the reality is that it's our responsibility to also take note of this special hidden task. So from that point on, all my estimates included analytics setup. I also tested it like load testing. I also tried some quick checks on the security part, and of course the performance. So usually, this is not really a responsibility of developers. But sometimes, if you want to know the real scope of the project, the bigger picture, you have to take into account these following items. Agreed. So now, when you're looking at the real side, you'll see that deploy tab over there. And then also, it's not enough for us to know how to deploy Rails. It's also important for us to know how to deploy or how to configure. For example, bundler, we'll be using that with Rails, or this gem, for example. This is paperclip. So the configurations for the production and the staging and the local setups should be prepared immediately. You shouldn't wait for the last few weeks to prepare your production site or staging site. Because the earlier your production site or staging site is set up, the higher the chances your app is gonna succeed or launch on time. So here's the updated strategy, or the updated version. And as you can see here, it's more preferable to do deployment and development in iterations. So you can see the deadline over here. It's much better for the dev team to develop a minimum viable product over here and then deploy that so that it can be tested by, for example, the stakeholders or customers, and then try to add more stuff, and then finally deploy those new stuff again. Because there are a lot of things that won't work in the production as well as you expected it to be. Okay. So during my stay at Bill Grocer, there are a couple of things that I encountered there. For example, at Bill Grocer, the version 2 of Bill Grocer was built in Cuba. Everything was custom. To be honest, I knew how to build websites using Rails, but then the app was made in Cuba. And then when I had to check the gems being used there, everything was custom. But here's the cool thing: it was built by a single dev, and then it was built by a single dev. But if you look at the performance of the application, it's really great. The performance is so the performance of the app is, you can say, great to really great. So it's that great. And it's that great. I mean, even the other devs in our company were amazed by how fast that app was. Since an e-commerce site, it's important for the customers to view the site really fast, and then the cost is much lower when you have a high-performing app. So here's the thing: once Bill Grocer tried to get more devs, the ability to the cost of having custom code start to appear. I got to work with a senior before. He's an infrastructure architect. He's a solutions architect as well. And then one of the advices he gave me is that when you're trying to launch a project that's going to be used by a lot of customers, the customers don't care how your app is built. And one of the main issues of having custom code is that this custom code won't have as much developers compared to those who use this. For example, this library over here is being used by a lot of developers. When we realized that when didn't have the support for Z-sets, I created my own. So, well, to be honest, we needed that library. But if you try to compare how many issues this library has, well, you can only see about 2 to 3. But when you try to check this well-known library, you can see that there are already 98 closed. Or even Mongoid has a lot more. Users. So now, when you try to search, when you try to encounter a problem using custom on your custom library, you'll have custom errors. But if you encounter an error or a problem using this library, for example, a lot of other developers have already encountered the same problem, and thus that would save you time in debugging. Why is your app not working in the way it should work? Okay. So I'm now midway through the things I've learned over the past couple of years. So this is lesson 4. And I would like to share a quick story on my judging experience 2 months ago. So here's the thing. I went back to Pisay, Philippine Science High School, and then I was asked to judge a couple of projects. So there were a lot of tech projects. And then I'll be sharing the things I've learned while I was judging those projects, because it's really similar to how we work as developers in startups or in companies. So I was given 15 projects to rate, and so there were 3 parts. So the first part is to have a pre-presentation score, and then you'll get to talk to the students, and then they'll present their projects. So how will their project work? What's the purpose? And so on and so forth. So we are first given an abstract, and then we try to rate the projects before the students present. And then finally, after the students present their projects, we'll now then judge again. We'll give them a final grade for the competition. So here's the cool thing. The first thing I did was to cluster all the easy projects and all the hard projects. And then of course, I realized, hey, why is this easy project even being submitted? Because it can be done in 1 to 2 weeks. Even though they're high school students, you know that they're more capable than that. So for example, this application is like just a 2D barcode reader or something like that. The abstract told me that, hey, this can be done in 1 to 2 weeks. So I rated them lower. And then the hard projects, like they're using the extra algorithm, they don't even have a subject for that, yet. And yet, so I rated those projects higher. But the moment I got to talk to the students, here's the pattern which I saw, and which was, for example, almost all of the hard projects weren't completed. One of the main issues was that, hey, we didn't have time, we weren't able to complete the project, so to be honest, they didn't have results, as in no results at all. They thought that they could do it, but unfortunately there was a deadline, and then there, 0, as in no results. But then on the other hand, the easy projects were done, they were complete, and then they were able to iterate, they were able to add icing, they were able to add an interface after the initial step. So of course, I realized that before we start thinking of the big picture and trying to do everything all at once, it's important for us to keep it simple. That's the one thing I remembered when I was judging those projects. And of course, there were hard projects which were completed. Those are the outliers. But then, if you don't want to risk it too much and try to do it in a very systematic way, it's much more ideal to do things in an iterative manner. For example, try to finish the skeleton first, and then build on top of that. Try to question what you have built so far, then try to add things on top of the existing platform you created before. Okay, next lesson. So, how much do you know about Rails? So, this can be Sinatra, Cuba, Arduino, Bluetooth, so on and so forth. So before I went to Deal Grocer, I came from IconHas where we're using Django. So Django is in Python. When I entered Deal Grocer, I was told to study Rails. And then I knew Rails and Django were similar. But of course, they're not really that similar because Rails has a different way of doing things. So now, it's usually Rails plus something else. So Rails plus blank. For example, you're going to integrate with a payment gateway. So you use active merchant or use something else. Or you're gonna integrate with, for example, MongoDB. So you're gonna use Mongo. So it's not enough for us to understand the inner workings of Rails. And no matter how much experience we have, there will always be new stuff in the new project that you have never encountered before. So for example, you're given a really big project, and then you have to study these new items. So for example, here, you're told to study Mongo, you need to research about ready semaphore, active merchant, and rescue. So how do we even study all of this? What's the strategy for getting things done faster without without having a lot of problems? So the thing we need to do is first, what are these libraries trying to abstract? So if you think about it, these are just abstraction layers. These are just Ruby code on top of existing technology or tools. For example, MongoDB. So you have Mongo for MongoDB. Ready semaphore is just created on top of Redis. This will just lock this, lock that. And then active merchant for PayPal and other payment gateways. So the strategy for this one would be to not only study how Mongoid abstracted or how the shortcuts or the abstraction layer, it's also important for us to know the details of how MongoDB works. Mongoid is very similar to Active Record, in the sense it's only similar. The code, if you have used Active Record before, Mongoid should be easier. But once you're running a production environment, and then a lot of customers are using it, you'll start realizing that, oh, when you try to do this in Mongoid, it's slow. When you try to do this in Active Record, it's fast. Because for one thing, NoSQL is very different from SQL. So it's not enough for us to learn just Mongoid. It's important to know NoSQL. It's important for us to know how MongoDB works, how Redis works, how the locking here works. For example, suddenly there's an item that locks forever. So how do you solve that? So we have to understand how Redis works and how Redis semaphore works. So we have to read the code as well. Okay. So this is also another way of trying to tame the beast. So you create a pet project first, and then you use the same set of technology tools in that bigger project. This way, you can try to simulate how all of the tools work together. Making one tool work is easy, but once you try to make all of this work together, you start to encounter problems like gem dependencies, or maybe this part is slow, so I have to change this, and then this doesn't work well with this one. So creating a small project or a pet project or a hobby project will make things easier for you to resolve these issues faster. Because once you have solved that before, it's easier to solve that in your much bigger project. And finally, estimation is easier if you've done it before. If I only knew Django or Sinatra before I learned Rails, and I was told to create a Rails application right now, so I know how much I need to learn and to become an advanced Rails user. But if I were told to write code in Sinatra, and I had never used a fact framework before, it would be hard for me to estimate how we're going to use Rails, because the way the team works when using Rails is different when you try to use Sinatra. Alright, so the last part is about how do you deal with changing specs or vague specs. I've been working with a lot of teams lately, and we encountered a very special problem. This problem might also happen to other companies as well. But here's the thing: sometimes that the specs are not yet final, and that's a really big problem. So how do we solve this? To be honest, some would say that maybe you can try to push back a bit, try to make sure that the specs are clear first before you try giving it to the dev team. But sometimes the world doesn't work like that. Sometimes there are constraints and you just have to deal with constraints. One thing I learned when I was a bit younger is that constraints are there to help you. Constraints make us more creative. The more constraints you have and the more goals you have, the harder it is to solve the problem. So now, we are constrained by the fact that the specs are not yet final. So what I did was that, hey, even if the specs are not yet final, there is a finite set of possibilities on how the product's going to evolve. So for example, in this one, we have a current version. And then I asked them, 3 months from now, how would you want the product to evolve? So of course, they had about 3 to 4 ideas. So I asked, how are those ideas going to work? So for example, in this simplified version, you have version X, which is a smaller product. And then I also asked them, how is version Y gonna work? So after they explained these things to me, I knew that if I were to do what was common in version X and in version Y, I knew that no matter what they tell us 3 months from now, I know that there wouldn't be wasted work. But if I were to do version X, then tell them that, hey, we have already done version X, and you want version Y, so we have to throw this part away, because that's not needed in version they want. So for the past couple of months, the strategy which we have been using is that we try to find the intersection and then we prioritize those features first. And then when the clear specs come out, we just need to do these things. But of course, this doesn't apply to all kinds of environments. I'm just saying that there's always a solution for each type of problem. Well, not all problems, of course. But then, once you have a lot of constraints, you can try to experiment on things and try to see what works. Because the problems may be different from company to company. But at the end of the day, it's going to be a mental exercise. And there's always that opportunity to improve. And for example, as long as you're keeping track of your changes and you have a history of what works and what doesn't, you'll have a higher success rate for the new projects to come. So that's it. So this is just a summary of what, these are just the focus points of my talk earlier. So that's it, and thank you very much for listening to my talk.